The morning sun cast long shadows across Horse Guards Parade, as Guardsman Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time. His hands trembled slightly, not from the June chill but from the weight of what lay ahead. Today was June 11th, 2016, and he would participate in one of Britain's most magnificent ceremonies, Trooping the Colour, celebrating Queen Elizabeth II's official 90th birthday. Thomas had been selected from the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards, one of the 5 regiments of foot guards that formed the Queen's Guard. At 23 years old, this would be his first time performing in front of the royal family and thousands of spectators. The ceremony, dating back to 1748, had evolved into a spectacular display of military precision and British pageantry. The preparation had begun months earlier. Every morning at dawn, the guards practiced their movements on the parade ground at Wellington Barracks. Each step had to be perfect, each turn executed with mathematical precision. The bearskin hats, standing 18 inches tall and weighing over a pound, had to remain perfectly positioned despite the complex drill movements. Thomas remembered the blisters on his feet from the endless hours of practice, the aching muscles from standing at attention for extended periods. Captain James Worthington, a 15-year veteran of the Welsh Guards, walked among the men with his practiced eye catching every minor imperfection. His polished boots clicked against the stone courtyard as he inspected each guardsman's uniform. The red tunics had to be immaculate, the brass buttons gleaming like mirrors and the white belts pristine. One speck of dust or a single loose thread could result in a guardsman being removed from the ceremony. The atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. These weren't just soldiers preparing for a parade. They were the custodians of centuries of tradition. Each regiment had its own history, its own battle honors, and its own unique details that distinguished it from the others. The Grenadier Guards wore their buttons evenly spaced, while the Coldstream Guards had theirs in pairs. The Irish Guards sported a blue plume in their bearskin, the Welsh Guards a white and green one, and the Scots Guards no plume at all. Behind the scenes, the logistics were mind-boggling. Over 400 officers and men would participate, along with 200 horses and 400 musicians from various military bands. The ceremony required perfect coordination between multiple regiments, the Household Cavalry, and the Royal Horse Artillery. Weather reports were checked constantly, as rain could affect the precision of the drill and the safety of the horses. The Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards had been chosen to troop their color this year. This meant their regimental flag would be carried through the ranks so every soldier could see it clearly. The tradition originated from the practical need for soldiers to recognize their regiment's colors in battle, but had evolved into a celebration of loyalty and service to the crown. As the final preparations continued, Thomas thought about his grandfather, who had served in the same regiment during World War II. The old man had filled Thomas's childhood with stories of honor, duty, and the pride of wearing the uniform. Today, Thomas would honor that legacy and become part of a living piece of British history that connected him to generations of guardsmen who had stood in the same position, feeling the same mixture of pride and nervousness that now coursed through his veins. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the early morning streets of Westminster as the Household Cavalry made their way to Horse Guards Parade. Major Sarah Pemberton rode at the head of the Life Guards, her silver breastplate catching the first rays of sunlight. The horses, magnificent black chargers standing over 16 hands high, had been groomed to perfection. Their coats gleamed like polished ebony, and their brass fittings sparkled in the morning light. Behind her rode the Blues and Royals in their distinctive blue tunics, their red plumes dancing with each step of their mounts. These weren't ordinary soldiers on horseback. They were members of the most elite mounted regiments in the British Army. Each trooper had undergone years of training, not just in military tactics but in the ancient art of ceremonial horsemanship. The horses themselves were carefully selected athletes. Thunder, Major Pemberton's mount, was a 17-hand Irish sport horse with the temperament of a seasoned performer. He had participated in 3 previous trooping ceremonies and seemed to understand the gravity of the occasion. His ears pricked forward as they approached Horse Guards, where the sound of military bands tuning their instruments drifted across the parade ground. The relationship between horse and rider in the Household Cavalry was sacred. These partnerships could last for years, with trooper and mount learning each other's movements until they functioned as a single unit. Trooper Michael Davies, riding in the second rank, had been paired with Sovereign, a bay gelding, for 3 years. They had trained together through scorching summer heat and bitter winter cold, perfecting their movements until they could execute the most complex maneuvers without a single misstep. The horses had undergone months of preparation for this day. They had been gradually exposed to the sounds they would encounter: the crash of drums, the blare of trumpets, the roar of aircraft overhead, and the cheers of thousands of spectators. Special training sessions involved recorded crowd noise played at increasing volumes while the horses performed their drills. Some horses naturally possessed the calm temperament needed for such occasions, while others required patient conditioning to overcome their flight instincts. As they entered Horse Guards Parade, the cavalry took their positions for the ceremony. The precision required was extraordinary. Each horse had to maintain exact spacing, moving as part of a larger formation that would flow like liquid across the parade ground. The slightest deviation could create a ripple effect, disrupting the entire display. The morning air was filled with the distinctive sounds of preparation. Leather creaked as troopers adjusted their position in their saddles. Bits jingled softly as horses chewed nervously. In the background, the guards' bands continued their final rehearsal, the music echoing off the surrounding buildings of Whitehall. Colonel Richard Haverson, Goldstick in waiting, observed the preparations with the eye of a master craftsman. He had commanded these ceremonies for over a decade and knew that success lay in the smallest details. A loose chin chain on a bridle, an improperly secured sword, or a horse showing signs of stress could all lead to disaster in front of the watching world. The stakes were enormous. This ceremony would be broadcast live to millions of viewers worldwide. Representatives from over 50 nations would be watching from the stands. Most importantly, Her Majesty the Queen, at 90 years old, would be taking the salute. There could be no mistakes, no lapses in concentration, no moment where centuries of tradition would be compromised by human error or animal unpredictability. The massed bands of the Household Division assembled on the northern edge of Horse Guards Parade as the morning progressed toward the ceremony's start time. Drum Major Tony Miller of the Grenadier Guard stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his gold-braided uniform making him appear even more imposing. In his hands, he carried the silver-topped pace stick that would guide over 400 musicians through one of the most complex musical performances in the military calendar. Behind him, the musicians prepared their instruments with the same attention to detail that the guards applied to their uniforms. Each brass instrument had been polished until it gleamed like gold. The drummers checked their tension rods one final time, ensuring that every beat would ring with perfect clarity across the parade ground. The corps of drums of the various regiments had practiced their intricate stick work until it became second nature, their movements synchronized to create a visual spectacle that matched the musical excellence. Bandmaster Kevin Roberts of the Irish Guards felt the familiar pre-performance energy coursing through his musicians. These weren't just military bandsmen, they were conservatory-trained musicians who had chosen to serve their country through music. Many held advanced degrees from prestigious institutions, like the Royal College of Music. Their repertoire for today included everything from traditional military marches to pieces specially composed. For royal occasions, the musical program for Trooping the Color was as precisely choreographed as the military movements. Each piece had been selected for its historical significance and its ability to accompany specific phases of the ceremony. The musicians had to master not only the musical complexity, but also the timing that would allow the guards to execute their drill movements in perfect synchronization with the music. Young clarinet player Emma Patterson, just 2 years out of music college, gripped her instrument nervously. She had joined the band of the Welsh Guards after completing her studies, drawn by the unique opportunity to combine her musical passion with military service. Today marked her first major ceremonial performance, and she could feel the weight of responsibility. One wrong note, one missed entrance could be heard by millions of listeners around the world. The relationship between the musicians and the drilling guards was symbiotic. The bands didn't simply provide background music. They were integral to the ceremony's success. The guards relied on musical cues to execute their movements, and the musicians had to maintain perfect tempo regardless of weather conditions, crowd noise, or unexpected delays. Years of training had taught them to continue playing even if their sheet music blew away, or if rain began to fall. The acoustic challenges of performing in Horse Guards Parade were significant. The surrounding buildings created complex sound reflections that could confuse both musicians and guards if not properly managed. The bandmasters had spent hours studying the acoustics of the venue, positioning their musicians to create the optimal sound projection, while ensuring that the guards could hear their cues clearly. As the royal standard was raised over Buckingham Palace, signaling that the Queen was in residence and would soon depart for the ceremony, the tension among the musicians reached its peak. They had rehearsed this moment countless times, but the live performance carried risks that no amount of practice could completely eliminate. Wind instruments could fail in the outdoor conditions, drum heads could split from the tension, and brass instruments could stick from the morning dampness. The sound check had been completed before dawn, with technicians ensuring that the BBC's recording equipment would capture every nuance of the performance. The audio would not only broadcast live, but would become part of the permanent historical record. Future generations would judge their performance, making every note, every pause, every crescendo a matter of lasting importance. Drum Major Miller raised his pace stick, and 400 musicians prepared to create the soundtrack for one of Britain's most treasured traditions, knowing that their music would help transform a military parade into a moment of national celebration and royal tribute. At exactly 10:30 a.m., the gates of Buckingham Palace opened, and the Queen's procession began its journey to Horse Guards Parade. Her Majesty rode in the 1902 state landau, a magnificent carriage that had carried British monarchs for over a century. The carriage, drawn by 4 perfectly matched Windsor gray horses, represented the living link between past and present that made this ceremony so meaningful. Accompanying the Queen were other members of the royal family, each playing their part in the carefully orchestrated display of monarchy in action. The Duke of Edinburgh, despite being 95 years old, sat beside his wife with the bearing of the naval officer he had once been. Their presence transformed the military ceremony into a truly royal occasion, elevating it from a simple parade to a state celebration. The crowds that lined the route from Buckingham Palace to Horse Guards had been gathering since early morning. Families with children, tourists from around the world, and local Londoners who had witnessed this spectacle many times before all pressed against the barriers for a glimpse of the royal procession. Police constables and security personnel maintained a watchful eye, but the atmosphere was one of celebration rather than concern. Among the spectators stood Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old widow who had attended trooping. The color almost every year since 1953. She remembered watching the Queen's coronation ceremony and had witnessed the evolution of the monarchy through decades of change. For her, this annual ceremony represented continuity in an ever-changing world, a reminder that some traditions endured despite the passage of time. The carriage horses, magnificent animals trained specifically for royal duties, maintained their steady pace despite the crowds and noise. These weren't ordinary horses. They were carefully selected for their temperament, appearance, and ability to handle the pressure of public appearances. Each horse underwent years of training at the Royal Mews, learning to remain calm in crowds, to ignore sudden noises, and to maintain perfect formation regardless of external distractions. As the procession approached Horse Guards Parade, the guards and musicians who had been preparing all morning felt the final surge of adrenaline that preceded their performance. This was the moment when months of preparation would culminate in a single, flawless display of military precision and British pageantry. The Queen's arrival transformed the atmosphere on Horse Guards Parade. What had been a military rehearsal suddenly became a living piece of history. The guards stood even straighter. The musicians prepared their instruments with renewed focus, and the horses of the household cavalry seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Queen Elizabeth II, at 90 years old, embodied the institution of monarchy that these guards had sworn to protect. She had witnessed the ceremony from multiple perspectives. As a young princess learning the duties that would one day be hers, as a new monarch establishing her relationship with the military, and now as Britain's longest reigning sovereign, representing the continuity that made the ceremony meaningful. The Queen's presence also brought a deeply personal dimension to the proceedings. Many of the guards and musicians serving that day had family members who had served in previous generations. They were not just performing for their sovereign. They were honoring the sacrifices and service of all who had worn the uniform before them. As the royal carriage took its position, and the Queen prepared to take the salute, the centuries of tradition that had led to this moment seemed to converge. The guards who would soon march past her represented an unbroken chain of service that stretched back through 2 world wars, countless smaller conflicts, and the peaceful periods in between when they had maintained their standards and passed their knowledge to the next generation. The ceremony was about to begin in earnest, and every participant understood that they were about to become part of a tradition that would continue long after they had left the service, carried forward by future generations who would stand in the same positions and feel the same mixture of pride, responsibility, and connection to something greater than themselves. The ceremony began with the arrival of the field officer in brigade waiting, who rode onto Horse Guards Parade to report that the parade was ready for the Queen's inspection. This moment marked the formal beginning of a ritual that would unfold with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, every movement calculated and rehearsed to perfection. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison of the Grenadier Guards carried the immense responsibility of commanding the parade. As the field officer, he would guide the entire ceremony, ensuring that each phase flowed seamlessly into the next. His commands, given through a combination of voice orders and sword movements, would coordinate the actions of over 1,400 military personnel across the parade ground. The first major sequence involved the Queen's inspection of her guards. As her carriage moved slowly along the ranks, each guardsman stood at perfect attention, eyes fixed straight ahead, regardless of the historic moment unfolding mere feet away. For many of these young soldiers, this would be their closest encounter with the monarch they had sworn to serve. The discipline required to maintain their composure while the Queen passed within arm's reach demonstrated the highest levels of military training. Guardsman Thomas. Mitchell felt his heart racing as the royal carriage approached his section of the line. The Queen, dressed in a bright blue coat and matching hat, looked directly at the guards as she passed. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Thomas experienced a profound connection to the centuries of service that his presence represented. The Queen's gentle nod of acknowledgement was barely perceptible, but for Thomas, it validated every hour of training and every sacrifice he had made to earn his place in the ranks. The inspection revealed the incredible attention to detail that characterized the ceremony. Every button gleamed, every piece of brass fittings reflected the morning sun like mirrors, and every guardsman's posture demonstrated the pride they took in their appearance and their service. The bearskin hats, despite their considerable weight and the warmth of the June morning, remained perfectly positioned throughout the lengthy inspection. Behind the perfect facade lay months of preparation that most spectators never witnessed. The guards had practiced this inspection routine countless times, learning to maintain their composure while fighting the natural human impulse to watch the Queen as she passed. They had trained in all weather conditions, learning to keep their equipment spotless despite rain, wind, and the normal wear of extended outdoor ceremonies. The Queen's horse, Burmese, had been retired from ceremonial duties several years earlier, but Her Majesty continued the inspection from her carriage with the same keen eye she had demonstrated during her decades of mounted participation. She observed not just the appearance of her guards, but their bearing, their alertness, and the subtle signs that indicated their readiness for service. As the inspection concluded, the real spectacle of the ceremony began to unfold. The massed band struck up the first of the traditional marches that would accompany the trooping of the color. The music filled Horse Guards Parade with sound that seemed to make the very stones resonate with military pride. The complex harmonies and rhythms that the musicians had, perfected in months of rehearsal, created an emotional backdrop that elevated the ceremony. From a simple military display to a moving tribute to service and tradition, the guards began their intricate drill movements, executing maneuvers that demonstrated both individual excellence and collective precision. Each step had been measured and practiced until it became automatic, yet the guards remained alert and responsive to the commands that would guide them through the complex choreography of the ceremony. The crowd of spectators, including dignitaries, military veterans, and families of the participating guardsmen, watched in respectful silence as the ceremony unfolded. Many had attended previous trooping ceremonies, but each year brought new participants and subtle changes that kept the tradition alive while honoring its historical roots. The combination of military precision, musical excellence, and royal pageantry created a uniquely British spectacle that captured the imagination of viewers around the world. The climactic moment of the ceremony arrived as the color of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards was trooped through the ranks. Ensign David Wellington, just 22 years old and a recent graduate of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, carried the sacred standard with hands that trembled slightly from the weight of responsibility, rather than the physical burden of the silk flag. The color itself was a work of art, hand-embroidered with battle honors that told the story of the regiment's service across centuries of British military history. From Waterloo to the Somme, from North Africa to the Falklands, each name represented thousands of soldiers who had served under this flag and others like it. The gold thread that spelled out these historic battles caught the sunlight as Ensign Wellington carried it through the perfectly aligned ranks of guardsmen. As the color passed each company, the guards presented arms in perfect unison, their rifles moving with mechanical precision despite the human hands that controlled them. The sound of 400 rifles being brought to the present position created a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding buildings, a sound that spoke of discipline earned through countless hours of drill practice. The tradition of trooping the color dated back to the 17th century, when regiments would parade their flags before battle so that every soldier could recognize their unit's standard in the chaos of combat. Now, centuries later, the ceremony had evolved into a celebration of regimental pride and loyalty to the crown, but it retained the solemnity and significance of its military origins. Colonel Marcus Whitfield, commanding the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, watched with intense pride as his men performed flawlessly. He had served with this regiment for 25 years, rising through the ranks while maintaining the standards that made this ceremony possible. For him, seeing his battalion's color trooped in the presence of the Queen represented the pinnacle of military achievement and the validation of everything he had worked to accomplish in his career. The musical accompaniment to the trooping was provided by the massed bands playing traditional airs that had been associated with this ceremony for generations. The haunting melody of the British Grenadiers filled the air as the color made its ceremonial journey, creating an emotional atmosphere that connected past and present in a way that few other traditions could achieve. The complexity of the drill movements during the trooping sequence was extraordinary. Guards companies wheeled and maneuvered around the parade ground in formations that looked effortless but required split-second timing and absolute trust in their fellow guardsmen. One soldier out of step could disrupt the entire formation, but months of practice had created a level of coordination that made such mistakes virtually impossible. The household cavalry, mounted on their magnificent horses, provided escort for the color during its journey through the ranks. The riders maintained perfect formation despite the complex movements of the guards around them, demonstrating the seamless integration of mounted and dismounted units that characterized the ceremony. Queen Elizabeth II watched the proceedings, with the practiced eye of someone who had witnessed this ceremony dozens of times, yet her attention never wavered. She understood better than anyone the significance of what she was witnessing. Young men and women dedicating themselves to service, carrying forward traditions that had sustained the monarchy and the nation through triumph and adversity alike. The trooping sequence reached its crescendo as the color was brought to the center of the parade ground and dipped in salute to the Queen. This moment, lasting only seconds, represented the culmination of months of preparation and centuries of tradition. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of horses shifting position and the distant rumble of London traffic beyond the ceremony's sacred space. As the color was returned to its place at the head of the guards, the participants and spectators alike understood that they had witnessed something irreplaceable, a living piece of British history that connected them to generations past and would continue to inspire generations yet to come. The ceremony concluded with the March Past, the grand finale that showcased the full splendor of the household division in motion. The guards, who had maintained perfect static positions throughout the earlier phases, now demonstrated their ability to move as a single entity across the parade ground. The sound of hundreds of boots striking the ground in perfect unison created a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the nation itself. Leading the march past were the household cavalry, their horses moving with the fluid grace that came from years of training, and the natural partnership between rider and mount. Major Sarah Pemberton, astride Thunder, felt the powerful muscles of her horse as he responded to the subtle signals that guided him through the complex maneuvers. The crowd's collective intake of breath as the cavalry executed a perfect wheel in front of the Queen reminded her why these ceremonies mattered so much to the British people. The Guards followed in companies, each regiment distinguished by the details that marked their unique history and traditions. The Grenadier Guards led, followed by the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and finally the Welsh Guards. Each unit maintained the precise spacing and alignment that transformed individual soldiers into a single, magnificent display of military excellence. Guardsman Thomas Mitchell, marching in the fourth rank of his company, experienced a profound sense of completion as they passed before the Queen. The months of preparation, the early morning rehearsals, the physical demands of training, and the mental pressure of performing flawlessly all converged into this single moment of recognition. The Queen's salute as they passed validated not only his service, but the service of every guardsman who had ever worn the uniform. The massed bands, now in motion themselves, continued to provide the musical foundation that elevated the march from a simple military movement to an inspiring demonstration of British pageantry. The complex harmonies and rhythms that filled Horse Guards Parade created an emotional atmosphere that touched spectators and participants alike, reminding them that they were witnessing something far greater than the sum of its individual parts. As the last Guards company passed the saluting base, the Royal Horse Artillery fired the traditional 41-gun salute from Green Park. The distant thunder of the cannons provided a martial backdrop that connected the ceremony to its military roots while acknowledging the Queen's presence with the honors due to the sovereign. The sound rolled across London, announcing to the city that another Trooping the Colour had reached its successful conclusion. The ceremony's end brought a mixture of relief and accomplishment to all who had participated. Months of preparation had culminated in a flawless performance that would become part of the historical record. The Guards had upheld the standards set by their predecessors, while adding their own contribution to a tradition that would continue long after their service ended. For the royal family, the ceremony represented the annual renewal of the bond between the monarchy and the military forces that served as its foundation. Queen Elizabeth II, having taken the salute with the dignity and grace that had characterized her long reign, had once again fulfilled her role as the symbolic head of the armed forces and the living embodiment of the nation's continuity. The crowds began to disperse, many heading to the Mall to witness the royal family's appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and the traditional RAF flypast. But for those who had participated in the ceremony itself, the real celebration was quieter and more personal. They had been part of something timeless, something that connected them to the best traditions of service and sacrifice that had sustained Britain through its greatest challenges. As Horse Guards Parade slowly emptied, the echoes of the morning's pageantry seemed to linger in the air. The guards would return to their regular duties, the musicians would pack away their instruments, and the horses would return to their stables. But the memory of this perfect June morning, when tradition and excellence combined to create something truly magnificent, would remain with all who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. Trooping the Colour 2016 had ended, but its legacy would endure, inspiring future generations to maintain the standards that made such ceremonies possible.